My name is Teresa Langford. I'm 67 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow of 3 winters. I have a soft spot for good tea, handwritten letters, and silence. The kind of silence that lets you hear your own breath when the world tries to talk over you. I also have a habit. Every Friday morning at 8:15, I walk down Maple Ridge Lane to Briggs Corner Market. I buy eggs, 1 can of crushed tomatoes, and a Powerball ticket. I always pick the same numbers. I always sign my name on the back. And I always fold it into fourths, neatly, and tuck it behind my late husband Frank's old library card in my wallet. It's a quiet routine, like prayer. It keeps me steady. But on the Tuesday morning when I learned that those numbers had hit, when the jackpot was $53 million, I didn't find out from the news or from the store clerk who usually winks and says, "Maybe this week, Mrs. Langford number." I found out because my daughter-in-law shoved her phone in my face and told me to pack my things. I was standing in the kitchen, steeping Earl Grey in my husband's favorite blue teacup, the one with the faint crack down the side. I just placed the saucer onto the counter when Sloane burst in, breathless, phone trembling in her hand. Her nail polish was chipped. Her smile wasn't. She turned the screen toward me. $53 million. In bold white letters. Red confetti. Around it like celebration. Like a bomb going off in the quietest house on our street. Sloane's voice was clear, cutting, rehearsed. "We don't need your pension anymore, Teresa." Behind her, Evan, my son, stood near the hallway, with his hands in his pockets, the same way he used to stand when he broke a neighbor's window as a boy. Guilty, unsure, already pulled away from me by something bigger than his conscience. He didn't say a word. Sloane kept going, like she'd waited years for this moment. "You've been here long enough. You've had a nice stay, but this house isn't meant for 3. You understand?" It wasn't a question. It was a closing statement. A lock clicking into place. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or throw the tea. I didn't ask why they thought it was okay to kick a mother out of her own bloodline. I just picked up my cup with both hands, careful not to spill, and whispered, more to the room than to them. "Did either of you check whose name is printed on that winning ticket?" The silence was instant, like someone had opened a freezer door in July. Sloane blinked. Evan looked at her, then at me, then at her again. She lowered the phone. He stepped forward and opened the drawer where I always keep my wallet. Found it. Opened it. I watched him unfold the ticket, creased 4 times, like always. My handwriting stared back at him in blue ink. Steady, slanted right, like it had been every Friday for 32 years. Teresa M. Langford. Evan's lips moved, but nothing came out. Sloane's face froze, like someone had pressed pause on a person. I set the cup down slowly, so it wouldn't rattle. And that's when I decided. Not out of rage, not revenge, but out of something deeper, something quieter. A line that had finally been crossed. I walked out of the kitchen without another word. Left them staring at the proof that they'd made a terrible assumption. That I was no longer a liability. I was leverage. And I wasn't going to be used again. Let them sit with that. Let them hear the echo of their own words in a house that used to be mine. In a family I used to think I belonged to. They took the money in their heads. I took the name. The one I'd signed. The one they never thought to look at. The one they'd soon realize came with choices and consequences. And before I tell you what I did next, I want you to remember something. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to know when to speak and when to sign your name. I didn't leave that day. Not right away. Instead, I made myself tea. Again. And sat in the corner of the sunroom where the light still reached me after noon. They stayed in the kitchen, whispering, pacing, trying to calculate what had just happened. But I didn't go back in. I didn't need to. I already knew what kind of arithmetic they'd been doing in their heads for months, maybe years. And I, Teresa Langford, 67 years old, widow of Frank Langford, mother to a son who had my eyes but not my backbone, was still sitting there, still here, even if they had quietly forgotten. 3 years ago, when Frank passed, I lost more than a husband. I lost the rhythm of my days, the garden we'd grown together, the morning crossword banter, the knowing glances over church coffee. I lost the man who used to fill the space between my thoughts. And then, just as the grief had begun to set like concrete, they came with the suggestion, "You shouldn't be alone in that house, Mom. It's not safe anymore. We've got a room, and we'd love to have you." So I said yes. I packed up my wedding china, wrapped each piece in the pages of a book I no longer had the strength to finish, and left behind the home I had built with 43 years of quiet loyalty. I kept only the essentials: a few cookbooks, a folded quilt, Frank's library card, and the little photo of us taken in 1983, before the gray, before the forgetting. The first night in Evan and Sloane's guest room, I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the pale blue walls and matching throw pillows, realizing something sharp. I was a guest in my own lineage. Their house smelled different, like lavender and citrus, not wood polish and coffee grounds. Their voices were quicker. Their laughter never reached the eyes, and the framed photos on the hallway walls had been professionally curated, not lived-in memories. There were no smudged fingerprints on the corners. That Friday, just like every Friday, I walked to Briggs Corner Market. Noah Briggs, son of the original Mr. Briggs, was already behind the counter, straightening a row of chewing gum packs when I walked in. He looked up, smiled. "Same numbers, Mrs. Langford? Always. Don't forget to sign it. Wouldn't dream of it." He slid a pen across the counter, and I signed my name the way I'd done for 3 decades. Full name, neat cursive. A little slant to the right, like Frank used to tease me about. I folded the ticket into fourths. Then I opened the back of my wallet, slid the folded paper behind the worn-out library card, with Frank's name still visible in faded ink. Franklin R. Langford, cardholder, since 1976. He loved that card more than his driver's license, carried it even when he forgot his keys. "The day I lose this," he used to say, "is the day I stop being curious." And I carry it now because I don't want to forget what it felt like to be needed, to be part of someone else's learning. Back on the sidewalk, I looked up at the cold sky and whispered, "Still here, Frank. Still walking the same streets. Still signing that name. Still folding that ticket like a small hope. And still carrying you." When I got back to the house, Evan's house, though my name helped co-sign it once upon a time, I placed the ticket gently inside my drawer, between the cookbook tabs and a safety pin I never used. Later that evening, I heard Sloane on the phone talking to someone about a wine subscription and complaining about squeezing in elder care between yoga and emails. I didn't respond. I just sat by the window, holding Frank's card in one hand and the ticket in the other. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the clock ticking in stubborn rhythm. No one came to check on me. No one asked how my walk was. And I realized something brutal and simple. I was still here, but I had become invisible. So I folded the card back into my wallet, placed the ticket behind it again, and whispered into the evening air, "You'll see me soon enough." Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? If this story speaks to you, leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. And remember, your name matters. Write it proudly, fold it carefully, and never let anyone erase you. Every morning, I woke up to the soft creak of the floorboard near the stairwell, careful not to wake anyone else. The guest room they let me stay in didn't even have a proper lock. It had a sliding latch, the kind you'd use for a garden shed. I didn't complain. I told myself it was temporary. Everything felt temporary. I cooked breakfast before the sun even fully rose. Sloane liked oat milk in her coffee. Evan preferred eggs over medium, not too runny, with turkey bacon. Little Mia hated crusts on her toast. I remembered it all. I folded laundry with practiced hands. I pushed the grocery cart through the aisles of Hensley Market, clipping coupons, calculating every cent. But no one ever said thank you. Not once. The living room, they called it that. But to me, it was a hallway, a transition space. I didn't belong to the furniture, to the photo frames on the walls, to the thick cream rug where Mia played with her dolls. I wasn't invited into the family photos they took last Christmas. I stood by the kitchen counter while they smiled in front of the tree. Then one Thursday afternoon, Sloane came home early from her office job. She carried a manila folder and an air of management. She placed it on the table where I was peeling carrots. "Teresa," she said without looking at me. "Evan and I thought it'd be helpful to clarify things, financially speaking." I dried my hands on my apron. She opened the folder and pulled out a spreadsheet, carefully color-coded with a yellow highlighter, her signature shade. My name was at the top. Underneath, a breakdown of household costs utilities, $136.47. Food, $210. Household supplies, $57.89. Entertainment, shared streaming accounts, $12.99. Total, $417.35. She tapped the bottom cell. We rounded it down to an even $400. That way, it's easier for budgeting. It's fair. You live here too. I stared at the paper. The exact amount of my monthly pension deposit. Not a dollar spared. Evan walked in from the garage, wiping his hands with a rag. "It's not a big deal, Mom. I mean, come on. You eat here. You use water, electricity. It's not like we're charging you rent." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, just because I didn't trust myself to speak. Inside, something broke in me, not loud like glass, more like the soft tear of fabric, too worn to hold anymore. I went back to peeling carrots. That night, I stared at the yellow highlighted sheet again while everyone else watched TV in the living room. I could hear the laugh track from their sitcom echo into the hallway I sat in. My fingers touched the edge of the paper. It was warm from my lap. That shade of yellow, bright, unfeeling, had been chosen to represent my place in their home. A color meant for notes and disclaimers. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a calculation. And when love is measured with numbers, it stops being love. The chandelier in the dining room was far too grand for a house that lacked warmth. Sloane loved to entertain. That much was obvious. Her guest list tonight included hedge fund managers, tech executives, and one woman whose diamonds sparkled like they could blind God. I stood in the kitchen, behind the swinging door, polishing wine glasses with the precision of someone who once ran a household of her own. Frank used to joke that I could tell how someone was feeling by the way they held a glass. Firm and high. They're bluffing. Loose and low. They're listening. Clutched. They're nervous. Now, I held each one like a memory. Crystal, stemmed, delicate. More delicate than how they treated me. Laughter echoed from the dining room. That expensive, rehearsed laughter of people who toast without ever making eye contact. The kind that filled a room and left no space for truth. I had just finished rinsing a set of red wine goblets when I heard it. It's like having a live-in maid who pays you rent. One voice chuckled. There was a pause, followed by a burst of louder laughter. Not awkward, not apologetic. Full, careless laughter. And then Sloane's voice. Amused, complicit. Well, technically she does live here rent-free, but Evan thought it was only fair she contributed to household expenses. Glass in hand, I stood motionless. I wasn't shocked. Number. But the words still landed somewhere deep, as if they'd been searching for an open wound and finally found one. A live-in maid. I once helped Evan memorize multiplication tables in this very house. Sat beside him with flashcards and peanut butter crackers while he cried over long division. I once patched his soccer socks before every game because we couldn't afford new ones and he didn't like the itchy feeling of holes. I once taught him how to write thank you notes. Ironically. And now, I'm a maid who pays rent, a punchline, a utility wrapped in skin. They used to call me Mom, not in the distant, habitual way people say it out of obligation, but the kind of mom that felt safe to them. Their anchor, their audience, their forgiver. I placed the glass on the towel and picked up the next. Steam still rose from the sink. My hands moved out of habit. I wasn't even thinking, just feeling. I tapped the edge of the glass gently, almost rhythmically, with my fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, dull clink that only I could hear in the background of all their clamor. It was almost musical. A quiet code. A little metronome to keep myself steady. Maybe this is how women disappear. Not all at once, but in layers. First, your name gets shorter. Then your stories become boring. Your warnings become nagging. Your generosity becomes debt. And eventually, your presence becomes invisible. They toasted something in there. I heard a cheer, then the clink of many glasses, more laughter. I imagined the table, long, candlelit, with handmade menus and calligraphed name cards. Sloane loved that kind of thing. Details that didn't require depth. And I stood behind the door. A door I wasn't even invited to walk through tonight. My name wasn't on the menu. It wasn't whispered in reverence or remembered in grace. It was forgotten, or worse, repurposed into a joke. I wanted to walk in there and shout, just to see if they'd jump, just to remind them that I still had a voice. But I didn't. Instead, I kept polishing. Tap, tap, tap. Sometimes dignity isn't loud. It doesn't throw the door open or make a speech. Sometimes dignity is in the refusal to let bitterness warp you, to keep doing the small, quiet things that make you you, even when no one's watching. So I wiped down the last glass, set it beside its siblings like soldiers in formation, and I stared at my reflection in the gleam. Tired, weathered, but still me. They may have rewritten my role in this house, but they didn't erase me. And as I turned off the faucet, I thought to myself, if they're going to make me invisible, I might as well learn how to disappear on my own terms. And when I do, I won't leave empty-handed. I came back from my evening walk to find them at the dining table, not eating, but spreading out blueprints, color printed, stapled in the top left corner, even laminated. That told me one thing. This wasn't a brainstorm. It was a presentation. Sloane waved me over like she was introducing a guest speaker. We've been working on something that we think you'll love. Evan smiled that shallow smile he wears when he's sure he's done something clever. We thought it's time you had your own space, with some privacy. Not just the living room couch, Sloane pulled out a folded trifold board, like she was pitching at a school science fair. On it was a design, a small room tucked neatly beneath the staircase in the basement. One single bed, a corner sink, a curtain in place of a door, and, my favorite feature, a line item that read, "Estimated cost, $1,730. Basic finishes." She tapped the rendering with her pink French tip nail. See? Cozy, minimalist, clean, and you won't have to tiptoe around us anymore. I stared at the plans. The lines were clean, precise. Everything had its label: bed, lamp, power outlet. What wasn't labeled was louder than what was: the concrete walls, the single slit window that wouldn't open, the lack of a closet. The word privacy was printed in bold across the top. I looked up. Privacy doesn't come from how deep underground you bury someone, I said. It comes from how much you respect them above ground. Silence. Evan shifted in his seat. Sloane's eyes flinched, but her mouth stayed firm, like a real estate agent unwilling to lower the price. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just reached out and touched the blueprint, my finger resting on the corner where it said, "PVC plumbing optional, for budget concerns." It hit me then, the ache behind all their efforts. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to contain me, to tuck me away like clutter. Sloane broke the silence. "We thought you might appreciate not having to sleep in the living room anymore." I smiled, softly, and here I thought the living room was temporary. No one spoke. I turned, walked to the window, and stood there for a long moment. Outside, the neighbor's porch lights flickered on, casting pale, yellow shadows across the sidewalk. I used to think light made a home warm, but now I knew better. It's not the lighting. It's the way people speak to you in that light. Behind me, I heard paper being gathered, the rustle of plans being stacked. They were proud of that design, that gift of a basement. But it wasn't a gift. It was a blueprint for erasure. I didn't protest. I just kept staring out at the dark, letting them wonder what part of me they had just buried under their $1,730 plan. Every Thursday afternoon, I walked the 4 blocks to McKinley's corner store. It had become a ritual, not out of desperation, but as a strange act of remembering. And maybe a quiet hope. The cashier, Liam, always greeted me with the same polite nod. He never asked questions, never made small talk. That was something I appreciated more than he'd ever know. The smell of aging linoleum, the buzz of the old refrigerator near the back, familiar comforts. I stepped up to the counter and asked, "Can I get my usual?" He handed me a slip, 5 lines of numbers I picked myself long ago. They never changed. As I walked home, the breeze was crisp, like someone had opened a new chapter in the air. I paused on the second block, where an old elm tree stood. Right under that tree, Evan scraped his knee learning to ride a bike. I remember bandaging it while he sobbed, "You're the best, Mom." That memory, once warm, now a slow ache. At the corner crosswalk, I slowed my steps. I held the lottery ticket in both hands like it were a pressed flower from a forgotten book. My eyes traced each number. 14, our wedding day. My husband wore his only navy suit, and I wore my mother's pearls. We didn't have much, but we had promise. 7, Evan's birthday, the year he asked me why the sky was blue and why pancakes couldn't be dinner every day. 23, our engagement date, the night he carved our initials into the old oak bench at Foreston Lake. 31, the house number of the first home we ever owned, where Evan lost his first tooth on the porch. 12, the month my husband passed, and the month I learned how to survive without collapsing. Numbers. Simple digits to the world. But to me, they held a pulse, a heartbeat of memories stitched in years, moments, and milestones. I smiled, just faintly. Not out of amusement, but clarity. Maybe, just maybe, it was time these numbers spoke for me. I had whispered through life long enough. At home, I entered through the back kitchen door, careful not to let it creak. The house was quiet. Sloane had taken the kids to gymnastics, and Evan was at work. I stood in the dining room for a beat too long, gazing at the framed photographs on the shelf. None of me. That used to sting. Now, it simply informed. I opened my purse, pulled out my wallet, and slid out a faded photo of our wedding day. My husband's eyes twinkled behind his square glasses, and I looked so young I barely recognized myself. Gently, I turned the photo over and taped the ticket to the back. Then I placed it back into the secret flap of my wallet, right behind the fabric lining. A place neither Sloane nor Evan would ever think to look. That picture had lived there since the year after my husband died. Somehow it felt like the safest vault in the world. I sat down at the kitchen table, a soft clink as my ring brushed against the edge. A different ring now. My original was resized after arthritis made it too tight. Still, it carried the same promise. Leaning back, I closed my eyes. Those numbers, they weren't just lottery picks. They were bookmarks. To a life lived, to love given, and to the people I once thought would carry it forward with grace. I opened my eyes to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. A quiet resolve settled into my chest. If no one else in this house remembered what those numbers meant, then perhaps they would learn. One way or another. That evening, the house was unusually quiet. I stood in the laundry room, folding one of Evan's button-down shirts, careful with the creases, the way I always had, out of habit, not devotion. The hum of the dryer had just stopped when I heard the television flicker on in the living room. I hadn't touched the remote. "It must have been the timer," I muttered, wiping my hands on a towel. I walked out slowly, still holding the last shirt. On screen was a polished news anchor with bright teeth and that perfectly rehearsed smile. And now, the winning numbers for tonight's Powerball. I stopped mid-step. My breath caught, not out of excitement, not yet, just a flicker of recognition, like a page I hadn't meant to turn to, but now that I had, I couldn't look away. The anchor's voice rang out. 14. My fingers tightened around the shirt. 7. My throat dried. 23. I felt the room get quieter. Not because the TV dimmed, but because my mind stopped counting time the way it usually did. Seconds now stretched, warped like heat waves over pavement. I walked to the small table by the door, where my purse still sat from earlier. Calmly, I pulled out my wallet. My fingers, though old and knotted, moved with strange precision. They knew exactly where to go, beneath the fabric flap, behind the faded photo of our wedding day. Frank's tie was crooked in that picture. I always loved that he never noticed. There, tucked neatly, was the lottery ticket. I held it gently. It was just a slip of paper, meaningless until that moment. I flipped it over. 14, 7, 23. I continued down the line, matching every number the anchor read, one after another. Like stepping stones over water I never believed I could cross. My hands began to tremble, not violently, not out of fear, but with something I hadn't felt in years. Release. The anchor finished reading. The studio lights sparkled behind her. The music played, and the screen shifted to something else. I didn't hear it. I didn't need to. I walked over to the television, remote in hand, and turned it off. Silence returned. I didn't scream. I didn't dance. I sat down on the edge of the couch, where the cushions still held the shape of the grandchild who'd bounced on them earlier. I looked down at the numbers again, now glowing faintly from the porch light seeping in through the curtains. I traced each one with my thumb, not to verify, but to honor. Then I whispered, barely loud enough for the empty room to hear, "Frank, you'd love this part." The air felt warmer somehow, not because of the money, because I knew I wouldn't have to explain it to him. He'd just know. He'd chuckle, pull me close, and say something like, "Told you those numbers were lucky." But Frank was gone. So I sat with that moment alone, and for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel lonely. I felt ready. I didn't shout. I didn't dance around the kitchen table. There were no tears, no champagne, no breathless calls to the morning news. Instead, I stood there for a few minutes, watching the TV screen go quiet again, then reached for my phone. My hands still trembled slightly, not from shock, but from the magnitude of stillness that had settled over me. I called 2 people, only 2. The first was Miriam Cole. She had been Frank's colleague for years before he passed, an estate attorney with a sharp mind, a warm laugh, and a loyalty that outlived the man himself. Miriam and I had fallen out of touch after Frank died, not out of ill will, just the slow fading of routines once anchored by someone else's presence. But her number hadn't changed. She picked up on the second ring. "Teresa?" she asked, confusion and delight mingling in her voice. "It's been a while," I said, "but I could use a favor." There was a pause, then her voice softened. "I always knew you'd call again, sooner or later. Miriam, I need to talk about estate protections, and I need someone to handle something discreet." "Teresa," she said again, slower this time, "are you all right?" "I think I just won the lottery." A longer silence. "Then I think we have some things to secure." I'll bring the paperwork I didn't need to explain further. She understood. She always had. The second person I called was Noah. Noah runs the tiny corner mart 2 blocks down from my house. The kind of place that still keeps handwritten tabs, still knows the names of the widows who buy milk and eggs on Tuesdays, and never asks why someone always plays the same numbers every week. I dialed the store. He answered with his usual cheerful bark. "Big winner." "Grocery, where your luck turns weekly," I smiled. "Noah, it's me, Teresa Langford." There was a beat. "Hey there, Miss Teresa. You want me to set aside your usual?" "No, not today. I just need to ask you something." "Shoot." "Last week, Thursday morning, I bought my ticket at your counter. You remember that?" "Course I do," he said, without missing a beat. "You signed it right after you paid. I even handed you my lucky pen 'cause yours ran out." I closed my eyes for a second. You saw me sign it? I watched you do it. Like every week. Front and back. You always sign across the top, right under the numbers. And you'd be willing to say that in writing? For you, Miss Teresa, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. You kidding me? You raised half the kids on this block. If this is about what I think it is, you bet I'll put it in writing. I didn't cry, but something in my chest shifted, just a little. That warm ache again, the one that reminds you you're not invisible, not entirely. Noah promised to meet Miriam and me the next morning to sign an affidavit. He offered to bring me some fresh peaches from his cousin's farm, too. I told him that would be lovely. I hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and looked out the window. The street was quiet. The roses Frank and I had planted decades ago were blooming again, deep red, thick-petaled, defiant in their survival. The same ones I used to trim with my son at 5 years old. I sat down at the kitchen table with a blank notepad. Miriam arrived at 9 a.m. sharp the next day, briefcase in hand, eyes wide with something between disbelief and admiration. I've seen people win, she said gently after we hugged, but I've never seen someone carry it like you are. I handed her the lottery ticket from where I'd hidden it, tucked behind the faded wedding photo in my wallet. I watched her eyes scan it, and then her lips part in quiet awe. She looked at me. Teresa, it's real. This is life-changing. No, I said softly. It's life-confirming. Her smile faltered for a second. We'll get everything transferred into your name, the trust, the ticket, the new estate structure. Quietly. You have nothing to prove to anyone. No, I repeated, but I do have something to reclaim. Later that morning, when Noah came in, still wearing his store apron, I welcomed him with tea and warm biscuits. He signed the affidavit in front of Miriam without hesitation, looked me in the eye, and added, "They're going to come for this. The ones who forgot you. But now it's your name on that ticket, not theirs." He didn't need to say anything else. That was the moment the shift became real, not just in the numbers, or the paper, or the bank account, but in the energy of it all. They had thought I was a relic, a weight, an old woman in their basement. But now, everything was under my name, and they didn't even know it yet. The morning light filtered through the sheer kitchen curtains like it always did, soft, forgiving, pretending not to notice the tension thick in the air. I stood by the sink, rinsing the last of my teacup from the night before, letting the warm water run a little longer than needed. Through the thin walls, I could hear them. Evan's voice was hushed, but firm, just loud enough to carry through the hallway like an unspoken threat. "We can move her to Golden Meadows now. It's time, Golden Meadows." The name was too polished, too clean. I knew the place. A retirement facility for the well-funded, they claimed, which was code for a place you tuck away problems you no longer want to feel responsible for. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed. Sloane responded, her tone sharp with urgency. "If we wait too long, she might start thinking she can handle things herself. We need to get ahead of this. Before she starts spending the money on, who knows what." I dried the teacup gently, slow circles, with a towel that had seen better decades. I placed it on the dish rack and sat down at the breakfast table, as if it were any other morning. My movements were deliberate, quiet, like a performance no one was watching. And then, the sound of a printer. Sloane had taken to presenting facts lately, as though evidence could replace empathy. A few seconds later, I heard her drop something onto the dining table with a satisfied exhale. "This article says 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt. 70, she emphasized, like the number itself was an argument. We're not being cruel, Evan. We're being practical. I imagined her tapping that paper with her acrylic nails, highlighting words in yellow, maybe even drawing little arrows next to dramatic quotes about financial ruin. All to make herself feel like the hero in this story. They didn't know I was awake, that I had heard every syllable. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I didn't storm in with accusations or plead with them to see me. Instead, I reached for the kettle, boiled more water, and made myself another cup of chamomile. The warmth filled the porcelain mug, and I wrapped both hands around it, anchoring myself. Their voices faded into the next room, muffled now by distance or perhaps their own delusions of nobility. I sat alone at the breakfast table, staring out the window where the old rosebush still clung to its last bloom. That rose had survived 3 seasons longer than expected. Resilient things often do. I reached for the book resting on the table. Jane Eyre, spine cracked, cover worn soft from decades of revisiting. I opened it to the page where I always paused, where Jane chooses herself over comfort. Tucked into that creased margin was the lottery ticket, numbers that meant nothing to anyone else, but everything to me. The day I married Frank, the day Evan was born, the day Frank slipped a ring on my finger and asked me to choose him for life. Sloane saw them as a payout. Evan saw them as freedom from responsibility. But to me, they were memories, etched in ink, cashed in by chance or maybe grace. I folded the ticket back into the book and placed it gently in my lap, sipping my tea. I wasn't going to react today, because they had plans, but so did I, and mine were already in motion. I waited until they'd settled, coffee in hand, morning paper rustling, and their laughter echoing like wind chimes, cheap, hollow, and unearned. Evan was scrolling through his phone, feet on the ottoman I'd crocheted for his first apartment. Sloane was stirring almond milk into her coffee with a golden spoon like she'd earned the morning. Like I hadn't bought every piece of furniture in that kitchen. Like I hadn't wiped Evan's nose and cooked her anniversary dinners when she forgot to book a caterer. Like I didn't know exactly how many pills I had left each week, because they controlled the refills now. I held the mug steady. Then I said, I think we need to talk about whose name is on that ticket. It was quiet at first. Then Evan laughed. Mom, what are you even... Sloane chuckled too, that high, sugary tone she used when she wanted something. Oh, sweetie, you're just overwhelmed. It's a lot. We know I didn't flinch. I took out the ticket, not from a drawer, not from a purse, but from the hollowed pages of The Secret Garden on the bookshelf behind me. Frank had given me that book when we were 19, said I was the only thing in his life that ever bloomed without permission. The room stopped moving. I placed the ticket on the table like a holy object, still warm from my hand, edges slightly softened. Nothing dramatic, just paper, ink, a moment captured. Sloane blinked, leaned in, and picked it up with 2 fingers like it might bite. She turned it over. There it was, my name, in my handwriting, and the little signature line. I'd signed it the same day, like I did every week. She blinked again. Then her pupil shrank, like someone had flipped the sun on inside her skull. She started, voice too thin to hold air. Evan leaned forward, grabbing the ticket from her hand. Mom, but you're here. You've been here with us this whole time. I nodded once. Yes, and you've been charging me for it. Rent, meals, medication, transportation. You sent me grocery lists with price tags circled. He flinched. She said nothing. I went on, voice like a spoon across porcelain. You called me family. Then you turned around and called me a burden. You told the neighbors I was lucky to live in your space. You told the pharmacist I forget things Evan looked down. We didn't mean it like that. No, I said. You meant it exactly like that. Sloane straightened her shoulders. We were trying to help you, Teresa. You were declining. I met her eyes with all the clarity of winter glass. You mean I was no longer convenient? She opened her mouth, closed it. I leaned back, letting silence do the rest. I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't give them what they were trained to expect from older women who'd been silenced too long. Instead, I picked up my tea, took a sip, then added, Do either of you remember what else I signed that week? Sloane shook her head. Evan blinked slowly, still stuck somewhere between denial and dread. Noah does, I said. Sloane's face twitched. That barista? That witness, I corrected. Their expressions shifted then, from confusion to recognition to slow, crawling fear. I set the cup down gently. You've been living on borrowed grace, children. You mistook my silence for senility, my stillness for surrender. But I watched, I listened, and I remember I let that sink in like morning frost. Sloane's voice cracked. So what now? You'll take the money and leave us? I smiled, not unkindly. No, Sloane. I'll take back what was always mine, and you'll stay exactly where you are, for now. I folded the ticket back into the secret garden. Evan's voice was barely audible. Mom? Yes? He swallowed. Did you always know? I stood up, smooth and unshaken. No, I said quietly, but I always hoped. And then I left the room, their silence trailing behind me like a debt unpaid. They stared at the ticket on the table like it was a lit fuse. Evan's hand twitched. Sloane's breathing turned shallow. We're family, Sloane said, her voice an octave too high, trying to sound soft but cracking under the pressure. This is ours. All of us. You didn't buy that ticket for yourself, right? You live here. You eat our food. You watch our TV. She was unraveling in real time. Evan cleared his throat, trying to regain some form of control. Mom, you're not seriously planning to keep all 53 million to yourself. That's not who you are. You've always said money should serve family, not divide it. I didn't speak. I looked down at the table, noticing a ring left from someone's glass, probably mine. I reached over and wiped it gently with the edge of my sleeve. The cloth swept across the surface slowly, carefully, as if I were removing not just the stain, but years of expectations. Sloane took a step closer. Teresa, be reasonable. We're not trying to take from you. We just want to plan this right. We can manage the funds, keep it safe, set up trusts. You know how many lottery winners go broke within a year? She pulled the folded article from earlier out of her pocket and waved it like a legal document. It's not about control. It's about protecting you from yourself. From making mistakes, I looked at her and smiled slightly. She flinched, maybe at how calm I was, or maybe at the sudden realization that none of her old tactics, the patronizing tone, the fake concern, would work anymore. They were still operating in the world before the name on the ticket had been revealed. I stayed quiet. Let the silence settle in. I wanted them to hear it. The absence of begging. The absence of explanation. The absence of guilt. Evan tried again. Mom, look. We can figure this out together. We're not enemies. "You're being cold, and that's not like you." No, I wasn't being cold. I was being clean. For decades, I had counted my pennies to make sure they never felt the lack of anything. I clipped coupons, made dinners stretch, bought birthday gifts even when I couldn't afford my own prescriptions. And when their jobs fell through or their bills piled up, I was there, quietly covering what they couldn't. I never asked for repayment. I never brought it up during arguments. I gave and gave and gave, thinking that generosity was love's language. But generosity without appreciation isn't kindness. It's servitude. And the thing about servitude is, the moment you stop, they don't thank you. They panic because they thought it was your job to give. I glanced at the ticket on the table, my name printed clearly, still slightly smudged, from when I signed it with damp fingers in the market parking lot. I thought of the security guard who had helped me that day, of the little boy who waved at me while his mother juggled bags of groceries. I thought of the stranger who handed me a bottle of water without asking for anything. None of them knew me. Yet they were kinder to me than the people sitting across this table, who had lived in my womb, my home, my heart. Sloane's voice turned desperate. "Teresa, this isn't how families act." I looked at her with steady eyes. "No," I said. "This is how people act when they realize the free well is drying up." She opened her mouth to argue, but I gently raised my hand. "I don't owe anyone my silence anymore," I said, "or my savings, or my skin." I stood and tucked the ticket back into my book, not hiding it, just placing it where I knew it would be respected. As I walked slowly toward the window, I noticed how the morning light caught the edge of the garden outside. The roses had bloomed again. That was the thing about nature. It didn't bloom for who shouted the loudest or who guilted the hardest. It bloomed when it was ready, when it was rooted, just like I was now. Miriam's office was quiet, soft sunlight filtering through the blinds. She didn't speak at first, just handed me a thick envelope, sealed, slightly yellowed at the edges. She placed it on the desk between us with a long sigh and looked me straight in the eye. "This is from Frank," she said gently. "He left it with me months before he passed. Said to give it to you only if things ever went cold with your son. He called it insurance in case your boy forgets how to be kind." His words. My throat tightened. I traced my finger over the seal, already knowing it wasn't just paper inside. I broke it open, slowly. Inside were legal documents. Frank's unmistakable signature on the last page. A trust. A dedicated account. $500,000. He'd set it up for me, in the event that Evan ever mistook me for a burden, not a mother. I blinked, lips pressed into a trembling line. Every line of the trust was clear. I would have unrestricted access to the fund. No co-signers. No oversight. Frank had even arranged for periodic deposits after his passing to ensure it wouldn't run dry during inflation or unexpected expenses. He used to say, Miriam continued softly, that loving someone means building things they might need before they ever ask. I nodded, unable to speak. Then she handed me a small, folded note. Frank's handwriting, always slightly tilted to the left, always in fountain pen. Just one sentence. "Don't let them count you out, Tess. You were always the sum." That's when the tears came, slow and quiet. I remembered him at the breakfast table, half laughing as he balanced our checkbook in the morning light. How he'd say, "The math only works if you remember the heart behind the numbers." It was something he muttered often, especially when Evan and Sloane came calling, needing help with this or that. He always gave, never complained. But he saw the shift long before I admitted it to myself. I folded the note carefully, tucked it into my purse. It felt heavier than gold. "You want me to draft a formal notice to Evan?" Miriam asked. I looked out the window. A tree swayed gently, one golden leaf letting go of the branch and floating down. "No," I whispered. "Not yet." Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. It was about truth and protection and dignity. All the things Frank knew I would one day need to hold on to. He hadn't left me behind. He had walked ahead and built me a place to land. I called for a family meeting. They didn't ask questions. They assumed, I suppose, that I was about to cave, to offer them a share of the money or some pitiful compromise wrapped in motherly guilt. Sloane arrived first, striding into the living room with a laptop tucked under her arm and a folder labeled Financial Scenarios, as if she were prepping for a business acquisition. Evan followed with a bottle of red wine and 3 glasses, still clinging to his charm like it could erase months of dismissal. I had already set the room. The lights were dimmed to a soft warmth, the fireplace flickering just enough to draw their eyes, but not their comfort. The coffee table sat between us, neutral territory. On it, a single manila folder. They sat. Sloane opened her folder, launching into a monologue about family legacy, strategic generosity, and tax efficiency. Evan poured the wine like it was communion. I didn't speak. I waited. When Sloane finally paused for breath and Evan slid a glass across to me, I gently pushed it aside. Then, I opened the manila folder and laid the contents face up. Printed spreadsheets, bank records, credit card statements, all marked and highlighted. Frank's final gift to me. A full financial investigation conducted months before his passing. The kind of research only a man who no longer trusted his son and daughter-in-law would commission. The numbers were devastating. "You're currently carrying a debt of $97,318, I said, voice even. Most of it accumulated in the last 2 years. Sloane blinked. "That's incorrect. Evan and I manage our finances. This is from Miriam's firm," I said. "Commissioned by your father, notarized, sealed. I just opened it 2 days ago." Evan leaned forward. "That's a violation of privacy." "No," I said softly. "It's a revelation of reality." Silence. I watched the understanding settle behind Sloane's eyes like a storm cloud creeping over the horizon. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hand twitched toward the documents, but she didn't touch them. "You've been living," I continued, "on rent payments I collected from the garden apartment. Payments that Frank and I never charged you for. Miriam rerouted them, quietly. When he got sick, Evan looked down. He was no longer angry, just exposed. And when those ran out," I said, "you applied for lines of credit using the house as collateral. You used my name on one application." Sloane's voice cracked. "We thought you'd left it for us. You never said—" "I never said because I was still alive," I replied. "Still paying for the roof over your heads, for the utilities, for the food. And I watched you treat me like a burden while living off my back. No yelling, no theatrics, just the weight of truth, heavy and inevitable." Sloane sat frozen, hands clenched tightly together in her lap. Evan stared at the glass of wine he hadn't touched. The confidence, the casual entitlement. They dissolved, molecule by molecule. I reached forward and closed the folder slowly. "I asked you here, not for negotiation," I said, "but for clarity, so that no one confuses love with tolerance again. They didn't speak. What could they say? My eyes lingered on the documents for a breath longer before I stood. "Enjoy your evening," I said gently. And I walked out of the room, leaving behind only the truth. I waited until the room had settled again. The wine glasses had stopped clinking. Evan had poured himself a second one, but this time he didn't raise a toast. Sloane was flipping through her phone like she had somewhere else to be, probably trying to disappear into the screen. Then I reached down beside me and placed a worn, blue notebook on the table. "What's that?" Sloane asked, her tone already tight. I gently slid it toward her. "My ledger," I said softly. "Ledger?" she repeated, clearly offended. "We're not running a corporate office here." "No," I nodded, still calm. "But for 2 years, I've tracked everything, just to remind myself that I existed in this house. She didn't open it. So I did. Page after page, handwritten columns. Hours watching Emma batches of soup made when someone was sick. Morning school, runs in the rain, $312 for Emma's new ballet uniform. When your card declined, $5,480 transferred quietly to cover a missed mortgage payment. Every item had a date, a short note, no bitterness, just record. "You've been keeping a tally?" Evan's voice cracked slightly. "I've been keeping perspective," I answered. Sloane scoffed. "This is emotional blackmail." I shook my head. "No, Sloane. This is emotional accounting. There's a difference." I flipped to a page near the back. I had drawn a line down the middle. On the left, what I gave. On the right, what I asked. The left column was full. The right column? Empty. "I'm not asking you to pay me back," I said gently. "I just wanted you both to understand what it cost me to be invisible in my own family." Sloane crossed her arms. "That's not fair. Families aren't meant to be measured in dollars and cents." "No." I looked her in the eyes. "Then why did you reduce me to rent? Why did you make me pay for your silence with my absence?" She opened her mouth but said nothing. "Not everything in here is about money," I continued. "Some things are small. Like when I watched Emma for 6 straight days while you both went on that business retreat that turned out to be a cruise." "That was a gift," Sloane said sharply. "No," I said, still even. "A gift is something freely given. What I gave was expected, without thanks, without even eye contact." There was a long silence. Evan looked toward the window, chewing on his bottom lip. Sloane blinked fast. Then I spoke one more line. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. "I kept this record not to demand compensation, but because one day I knew I'd have to remind you. I was part of the equation, not just a variable to be erased." That line hung there, like steam in a cold room, like something sacred that had no comeback. Inside, I felt an ache, not from hurt anymore, but from years of holding back truth in the name of peace. And now, finally, there was room for it. Not because they wanted to hear, but because I was no longer asking permission to speak. I folded the quilt Frank and I bought in Charleston on our 15th anniversary. Navy with little stitched sailboats. It smelled faintly of cedar and detergent. The room was quiet except for the zip of my suitcase. I placed inside only what I needed and what couldn't be replaced. My wedding album, the blue china teacup with the tiny chip I never minded, Frank's old flannel shirt I slept in when I missed him too much, and the worn manila envelope that held all the letters he wrote me during his deployments. And then there was the library card. Bent at the corners, The barcode faded from years of use. It was mine, just mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the card between my fingers. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, turning the dust in the air gold. For a long while, I didn't move. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Noah. He answered on the second ring. "Noah," I said, my voice steady. "Do you still have the key to Frank's community center room?" There was a pause. "I do," he said softly. "You okay, Teresa?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Frank always said I should reopen the senior skills class. "I think it's time." Noah chuckled, then said something that settled deep into my ribs. "He'd be proud of you. He always said you were the only person who made people feel seen without making them feel small." I blinked back tears. "Well, I'm tired of being invisible in my own house." Noah's voice warmed. "Then maybe it's not your house anymore." After we hung up, I moved through the kitchen. I made tea. 1 cup. Mine. No one to ask what's for dinner. No one to critique how I folded towels or remind me the thermostat cost money. Just quiet. I didn't slam drawers or stomp or cry. That wasn't my style. I was never loud. But I had learned that you don't need to raise your voice when you're finally listening to yourself. I looked out at the rosebush Frank planted the year Evan was born. It had 1 bloom left, still clinging on in early winter. "Look at you," I whispered. "Still showing up." Then I opened every window. The air was crisp and smelled like wood smoke. The breeze tugged at the curtains, and sunlight pooled on the hardwood floor. For the first time in 3 years, I put music on. Frank's favorite jazz record. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew what I was leaving. A house that didn't echo my laughter anymore. A son who treated me like a debit card. A daughter-in-law who saw me as a burden to be priced, not a person to be loved. And I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking toward something. I was returning to the version of myself that loved poetry readings, taught seniors how to email their grandkids, and knew the name of every librarian at the branch downtown. I was going to call Miss Loretta and see if she still made peach cobbler for church potlucks. I'd sign up to read to the 3rd graders again. I'd go to the Thursday line dancing class and not care if my knees popped. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was simply remembering. I closed my suitcase and wheeled it to the door, took one last look at the living room, now a spreadsheet battlefield. I didn't feel sadness, just clarity and relief. No one was home to ask where I was going, and for once, I didn't feel the need to explain. I was going somewhere I was wanted, or maybe just somewhere I could want myself again. Frank used to say, "You're the kind of woman who doesn't need a map." You are the compass. I didn't fully understand it then. But I think I do now. This wasn't leaving. This was going home to myself. Riverside didn't have chandeliers, no valet parking, no concierge who knew your favorite brand of bottled water. But it had something better. A maple tree outside my 2nd-floor window that caught the sun just right every afternoon. The building manager, a soft-spoken woman with a cardigan that looked hand-knitted, handed me the keys with a smile. Unit 2B was last rented by a retired English teacher, she said, pausing as if weighing something. "She lived here for 13 years. I think you'll fit in just fine." I nodded, cradling the keys in my palm like they were something sacred. The apartment was small. A studio, really. White walls with chips in the paint, scuffed floorboards. The kitchen window stuck a little when I tried to open it. But it had a little balcony with a rusting iron railing and just enough space for a folding chair and a potted plant. It smelled like dust and something faintly floral, like lavender from a life that used to be. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't overwhelmed. I was. But because for the first time in years, I wasn't crying out of disappointment. This place, as humble as it was, belonged to no one but me. I unpacked slowly, not because there was much to unpack, only what I had taken with me in that single suitcase. I placed Frank's old library card in the drawer beside my bed, folded his last note to me. Don't forget who you are, Tess. You were brilliant long before you were needed, and tucked it inside the pocket of my journal. I ran my fingers along the spine of the album from our wedding and placed it gently on the shelf, not in mourning, but in reverence. And then, the teacup. It was a delicate thing, white porcelain with a thin gold rim and a tiny chip on the handle, from the morning Sloane had knocked it over in a rush. I had kept it anyway. Frank used to say it looked like a cup that belonged in a storybook. I placed it on the small wooden shelf above the kitchen sink. It didn't match anything else in the room. But it didn't have to. For the first time in so long, I boiled water just for me, made a cup of Earl Grey, sat on the edge of the bed with the mug cradled in both hands, and just listened. The quiet wasn't empty. It was peaceful, like the apartment was breathing with me. I opened the window despite the sticky frame. The breeze carried in the scent of river grass and someone's overcooked casserole. The maple tree's leaves whispered in the wind, and I imagined Frank sitting beside me, nodding. "You're doing fine, Tess." I took out an old copy of To the Lighthouse and let my fingers fall open to a random page. Virginia Woolf's words met me like an old friend, half forgotten, but familiar. The room was still. The sun filtered in through gauzy curtains, casting long lines across the wooden floor. And in that moment, I wasn't a mother who'd been left behind. I wasn't a widow. I wasn't someone's retired babysitter or emergency contact or walking wallet. I was Teresa Langford, a woman who once loved teaching poetry, a woman who raised a family, a woman who had been broken, but not erased. And now, I had my own key, my own shelf, my own window to open. It wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about revenge. It was about breath, about space, about the quiet triumph of choosing yourself. I was once treated like a cost, a line item, an obligation. But here, I wasn't extra. I wasn't a burden. I was the homeowner, the one with the lease. I ran my fingers along the spines of my books, pausing at Leaves of Grass, then smiled. I had been subtracted from their lives. But here in Riverside, I was finally counted in. Not fancy, but it's home. And this time, mine. I never thought I'd be standing behind a microphone again. Not since my husband's memorial. Not since I sat silent in the front pew feeling smaller than my black dress. But here I was, invited to speak at the Shared Wisdom Night at the Riverside Senior Center. The room smelled like brewed coffee and cinnamon rolls. Folding chairs were scattered in neat rows. I could see the expectant faces. People in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. People who had buried spouses, outlived siblings, and, like me, were learning how to live with the silence after a life full of noise. They handed me a cordless mic and a cup of chamomile tea. I took a breath. "My name is Teresa Langford," I began. My voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of everything behind it. I was a wife for 41 years, a mother for 38, and a placeholder in someone else's life for much too long. The room quieted. Frank, my late husband, used to say, Teresa has a heart like a big warm porch. People rest there, but they don't always help maintain it. A few soft chuckles. I smiled gently. What I wish I had known earlier is that love without respect becomes duty, and duty without care turns into currency. I paused, glancing around the room. 2 months ago, my son and daughter-in-law won the lottery, $53 million, and they told me to leave. Gasps rippled through the room. They said I was just a burden with a pension, that they needed space, that I should figure something out now that I wasn't useful. Someone in the back whispered, "God have mercy." I didn't argue. I continued. I packed my bags. And as I left, I smiled and asked one question. "Did either of you check whose name is on that winning ticket?" A slow, stunned silence followed. I leaned into the mic, voice calm. It was mine. They took the money. I took the name. A few people clapped, soft at first. Not for revenge, but for the reclaiming of something more sacred than cash. I was never bitter, I said. Not really. But I did start, counting things. I pulled out the small notebook I now carried everywhere. My emotional ledger. Hours spent babysitting. Meals cooked. Bills paid. Miles driven. Days missed. Birthdays remembered. And the number of times I said yes when I wanted to say, "Please include me." More nods now. Someone murmured, "Preach." My daughter-in-law once told me, "We're not running a bank, Teresa." And I smiled and said, "Then stop treating me like an ATM." Laughter this time, but beneath it, understanding. I tell you this, I said slowly, because I know some of you have been there. Maybe you still are. I let the words sit. I learned that sometimes your greatest act of courage is not standing up to others, but sitting down with yourself and asking, have I counted myself in? Or have I let others write me off? The room was completely still now. No rustling, no side conversations, just listening. I'm not here to tell you how to win the lottery, I smiled, though it helps. Laughter again. But I will tell you this, value doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being known. I reached the end of my notebook, closed it, then looked up and said the last line I had rehearsed every night for a week. Count yourself in before anyone gets the chance to subtract you from their life. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was reverent, like the hush that falls over a room, not because something's ended, but because something new has just begun. And as I stepped down, several hands reached out to steady me. Not because I was frail, but because I was seen. I was folding my softest blanket, the one Frank had bought for me on our 30th anniversary, when my phone buzzed with a video call. The name on the screen made my breath catch. Emma Yellowheart. I hadn't heard from her since Thanksgiving. Not even a text. Not a note. After what happened at that dinner table, I assumed my son and his wife had decided to scrub me out of their daughter's world like chalk off a sidewalk. I stared at the screen for a second, wondering if it was a mistake. But then I saw her tiny face come into view, round cheeks, messy ponytail, and that one front tooth missing. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered. Her voice was cautious, but her eyes sparkled like always. "Mom said not to call. But I missed you." Just those words. And suddenly, the weight I'd been carrying these past few weeks loosened. Just a little. I sat down slowly on the couch, pressing the phone closer to my face as if I could reach through it and smooth back the wild strands of hair that always fell into her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking around the edges. I've missed you too. More than you'll ever know. She looked over her shoulder, then leaned in closer, her little hands adjusting the camera. I drew something for school, she said, pulling out a sheet of construction paper covered in colored pencil lines. It's called My Favorite Place in the World. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. A red brick building with a balcony. A big tree with fiery orange leaves. A small figure. Round face, gray curls, standing on the balcony, arms open. That's you, she grinned. And that's the tree you told me about. The maple, I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I placed my fingers gently on the screen where she had drawn me, as if I could hold that little version of myself in place and keep it safe forever. Emma watched me for a moment, her face softening. I know you moved. Mommy says you went away because you're tired, but I know you didn't leave me. Tears welled up, blurring the screen. She still knew. She still felt it. You're right, my love, I finally managed. I never left you. I never will. She beamed, then turned the drawing around and wrote something at the top in crooked, earnest handwriting. Grandma's house. Do you like it? She asked. I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. Instead, I just pressed my whole palm to the screen. A silent yes. A silent always. She mimicked the gesture, her tiny hand against mine through the glass. Then came the sound of footsteps and a door opening on her end. Her eyes darted sideways. I gotta go, she whispered quickly, but I'll call again. I promise. Okay, baby. I'll be here, the screen went black. I stayed on the couch a while, phone still in my hand, palm still warm where hers had been. Outside my window, the maple tree swayed in the late afternoon sun, casting golden shadows across the floor. I looked at the little drawing on the screen one more time, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not the polite kind I'd learned to wear like armor, but the quiet kind that came from a place deeper than hurt. They hadn't taken everything from me. Some bonds, the true ones, find their own way back. Even when the adults build walls, the children draw windows. And sometimes those drawings are more than enough. The holidays came and went. No one knocked on my door. No packages arrived. No cards. I watched the snow fall quietly onto the railing of my little balcony. Riverside wasn't grand, but it had peace. And sometimes, peace is louder than a house full of voices that don't know how to love you without keeping a tally. I had bought a new kettle. Blue, like the one Evan used to reach for when he was little. He always liked the sound it made, the whistle so shrill he'd cover his ears and giggle before racing me to the kitchen. I still remembered how he liked his tea. I sat down at the tiny oak desk by the window. The maple tree outside had lost all its leaves now. Stark branches reached for the sky, like fingers aching for something they once held. I opened a drawer and pulled out Frank's old pen, the one he used when signing library cards or jotting reminders to pick up extra jam. It still worked. Somehow, the ink hadn't dried out. I took a piece of thick cream stationery and slowly, quietly wrote a letter. Evan, I hope this finds you well. This isn't a plea, or a demand, or a guilt trip. It's simply an open door. If you ever feel ready to call me mom again, not the funder or the account, I'll be here. I don't need an apology, and I'm not offering explanations. Just know, there's still a mug here with dinosaurs on it. It's chipped, but it's clean. Like my heart. Love, Mom. I reread it only once, not to revise, but to feel it. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside a photo frame. Not the kind you'd hang on the wall, but one you'd sit on a shelf, discreet, like a memory you don't parade, but also don't hide. Behind the letter, I tucked Frank's library card. It had always meant something to Evan. He used to pretend it was a magic ticket. One swipe, and you could unlock any world. Even back then, he knew doors opened differently for readers. I placed the frame on the corner of my bookshelf. Not to mail, not to deliver, just to exist. Just in case. Maybe someday he'd visit. Maybe Emma would bring him. Maybe neither would come. That part didn't ache the way it once did. I had made peace with what wasn't mine to carry. I didn't need him to fall on his knees, or cry, or explain where it all went wrong. All I needed was to know I had drawn my boundary with love, not spite. Silence used to terrify me. It felt like a verdict. Now, it felt like a garden, quiet, but alive underneath. Growing roots no one sees. Later that evening, I brewed myself a cup of tea. I reached for the dinosaur mug and smiled. It didn't matter that it was chipped. Some things are more precious once they've survived a little damage. I sat on the couch with a book, wrapped in a blanket I'd crocheted decades ago. Outside, snowflakes drifted gently, like they didn't want to land too hard on the world. I didn't need a full house. I didn't need gifts or visits or promises of next time. What I needed was here, in the stillness, in the truth, in the choice to love without begging to be loved back, and in the quiet hope that someday someone might pick up that frame, pull out the letter, run their thumb over that card, and remember who I was when the noise had faded. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the tea and the memory of a little boy's laughter settle into the bones of the room. They didn't come, but I had sent my message, and it was enough. The morning sunlight filtered through the balcony blinds, soft and golden, wrapping around me like a familiar shawl. I stood on the patio, watering the maple tree, its leaves now tinged with early amber. I'd read somewhere that maples hold on to their color longer than most trees in autumn. Maybe they've learned how to stay beautiful, even as they let go. I poured the water gently along the soil, watching it soak in slow ripples. Not rushing, just being. There was something sacred about this rhythm. The quiet labor of care, of choosing what stays. Behind me, the table waited with quiet companions. A single ceramic teacup, white with tiny violets painted around the rim. An old letter from Frank, his last one, folded gently like it could still breathe. And the lottery ticket, now pressed between plastic like a museum artifact. I hadn't moved the ticket much. Not out of greed, not out of fear, but because sometimes the things we don't say still hold the loudest meaning. That ticket wasn't about $53 million anymore. It was about all the times I was asked to subtract myself until I finally decided to be whole again. They thought I took the money, but they took something far more precious from me long before that day. They took the tenderness out of my title. Mom became an ATM. Grandma became optional. My presence was a burden to manage. My absence, a convenience to arrange. For years, I allowed it. I told myself I was just loving them the best I could. But love isn't subtraction. And it's not a ledger. I didn't win because I had the right numbers. I won the moment I chose to stay standing. When I didn't beg for a seat at a table where I was no longer wanted. When I realized I didn't need to fight for their love. I just needed to stop charging interest on mine. That morning, I took a sip from the teacup. It tasted warm, earthy, like something that had steeped a long time to become what it was meant to be. I looked at the ticket once more, at my name. Teresa Langford, bold and certain in black print. No erasures, no nicknames, no rebranding for convenience. That was the name of a woman who'd stitched together a life out of scraps of dignity and hope, who raised a son, buried a husband, held a trembling granddaughter, and stood in front of an audience to tell her truth. I folded the letter from Frank back into its envelope and placed it next to the ticket. Then I whispered, only to the maple and maybe the wind. They thought I took the money. I smiled. They did. A beat of silence. But I took something else. I turned back toward the door, left the watering can behind, and gently closed the glass. The screen faded to black. White letters appeared. Love isn't a ledger. I kept the ticket. I kept the name.